again, we have a really critically important panel right now on workforce development. And after that panel, we're going to wrap things up, and then we're going to retire to a great reception. Bring your thirst and some of your hunger, because it sounds like we've got good locally produced food and beverage at the reception. So, and then of course we have the tours tomorrow, which are again in many ways the highlight of our coming together on a regional basis. So workforce development, we've heard of some of the barriers or some of the limitations to getting work done, and one of those barriers we've heard many times today is having trained people to do the work. And so we're really excited to have this panel here to help us unpack this challenge, but also all that's happening and the opportunity to train more folks to get the work done. And we're really thankful to have Becky Rowe, who leads this topic here at Shasta College, to moderate this. And I heard, Becky, at lunch some really remarkable sort of secondhand stories about young people coming through Shasta College and getting trained and actually getting into the forest and into the mills like right away. So to me, whatever you're doing sounds like something we need to emulate, and look forward to hearing more about it today.
Thank you, Secretary, and thank you, Regional Forester Eberline and the entire executive committee, the task force, and all of you for the opportunity today to have conversation about this topic. We are going to set things up a little bit different with our panel. We really do want this to be a conversation. We want it to be a discussion, both amongst our panelists and of course with you. Our panelists represent a very diverse set of voices, and I want to thank each of them, first of all, for giving us their time today, sharing their thoughts with us today, and just kind of letting you all know that we are all engaged in our own unique way in meeting the regional workforce and stewardship capacity challenges that we see. I've been fortunate enough to have worked closely with most of the panelists, and I really do value their unique perspectives. It helps to kind of blend and understand where everybody's coming from. I think it's important to have the discussion about where our region should be prioritizing investments in workforce development, and to be thoughtful and intentional as we cultivate those who will hold responsibility for not only maintaining what we're doing now and the projects that have been completed and the maintenance that goes with that, but also looking forward, carrying that forward into the future. So one of our main objectives today of the conversation that we hope to engage in is to share with you the specific opportunities that we as a panel kind of had some discussions about, came up with, that we feel will have meaningful impact for you to understand where we see opportunities for those in kind of your community of impact makers, where we see opportunities for that, as well as for kind of workforce development folks, as well as for employers, as well as for just all of us as a sector working together. In just a few minutes, Todd and Lindsay, Justin, Mark, and Tim are going to share their voices. They're going to share their why they're here and what they're focusing on, and why they felt it important to be here and engage in the conversation. First, though, I would like to share a little bit about my why. So again, I'm Becky Rowe. I'm Director of Forest Health here at Shasta College. And in my role, I oversee the day-to-day operational logistics of our forest health initiatives, which includes heavy equipment logging operations, truck driving, forestry and natural resources, our heavy equipment construction. But to be honest with you, and kind of an intimidating room, I guess, to do that in, little vulnerability, I 100% decidedly am not a subject matter expert in any of those things. I honestly couldn't operate a piece of equipment if my life depended on it, and as a matter of fact, if I tried, it might have a different outcome for my life. But the truth is, I don't have to be able to do any of those things, because from a workforce development perspective, we have an amazing team of faculty and staff and industry advisors, employers, the employers for the students that go through our programs, that are the subject matter experts, and that's who we are talking with to reach the conclusions about what we should be training and what changes should be made and how the evolution is happening. So that is something I think is just really important to always keep in mind, and really to get to the nugget of what my why is, what kind of the simple premise is when we talk about workforce development, which I would say is kind of the vision statement for what success looks like for me, how we kind of define it here within our team. That is what guides us in engaging the stakeholders that are kind of willing to get down in the trenches with us and really ensure that what we're teaching, the skills we're building, those outcomes are really what our students are needing to be job ready. And so in this context means that they're ready to do the work that needs to be done to reach the objectives of the task force and of the action plan. So my premise, my why, dun, 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 big reveal, and I was just teasing Tim here because I kind of a little bit started with a nugget from him, but program completion equals workforce potential, but job placement is really what equals workforce developed. So when we're talking about workforce development, it's not just setting up a whole bunch of training programs that meets a metric, that keeps some funding coming in. It's making sure that you're constantly checking back in with that collaborative partner set of industry or of employers, whether it's private, whether it's public, and that there's a workforce developed at the end of it through that job placement. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into the first slide. I'm going to give you a little bit of context, I want to kind of set the stage for some previous pre-discussions that we had as a panel. Then I'm going to let everybody, they're going to get to practice or actually showcase their 90-second insight, a little intro that they put together for themselves. But then we want to jump into questions and discussions so that we can have a conversation. There's a lot of complexities and it requires conversation. So we're going to review the action plan objectives from the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Action Plan, the one from 2021. And if you look at that action plan kind of through a workforce lens, you can draw conclusions around the types of workforce and stewardship training that are most likely going to be needed to have the capacity necessary to meet those objectives. The next we'll move on to a statewide kind of perspective that is being showcased in that action plan, but we'll kind of drill it down to a regional perspective and really kind of coming out of the themes from the regional profile that was shared this morning. That's going to help us clarify our regional problems and really kind of come up to a couple key problem statements there. What do we really, what's the conversation? And actually, I've heard the question being asked already. It's really not any different when you're talking about workforce development, but it's what are the barriers and how can those things be changed? And are the barriers that we all assume are the barriers actually the barriers? I mean, that's a key part of the conversation. And so then after that, we are going to kind of do a little wrap up after we get done with this discussion and kind of go back and share those opportunities for impact that we all can have a place in. I think really a couple key questions to think about as we get started is the question before us in regards to capacity building is really largely around pace and scale. So let's see if I hit the right one. Nope. That comes in that first bucket from the action plan objectives. So we've got the pace and scale. The other things that we're looking at as well are the strengthening of the protection of communities, managing forests to achieve our state's economic and environmental goals, driving innovation and progress. And they are really big goals. It requires a lot of strategic, coordinated effort. But since these objectives were laid out in January of 2021, progress has been made in most, if not all, of these areas. But again, those questions that I think kind of keep popping back up from a workforce lens is, how do you prioritize the types of workforce to be recruited and trained and then retained? After this huge backlog of work that needs to be done is completed, what levels of a maintenance workforce is going to be needed? And that kind of leads into the next. How do you outline a long-term transition plan for workforce that's being trained today for today's priorities, which are huge, we know that, pace and scale, and then maybe that workforce isn't needed 4 or 5 years from now. And so priorities shift, and they shift to something else, and the funding that's supporting that shifts with them. And so that has to be taken into consideration when you're thinking about setting someone up for, you know, what they're choosing as their career path and moving forward. Is this a short-term thing? Is this a long-term thing? So based on the objectives of the action plan, we assemble fairly thorough list of the types of different workforce that might be needed. You can kind of read through those there. Beneficial fire, reforestation. I think what's interesting as we look through that is the task force work groups that have been kind of chartered with building these strategic action plans. When you see the strategic action plans as they are completed and published and put out there, like the California Strategic Plan for expanding the use of beneficial fire, and the California Joint Strategy for Sustainable Outdoor Recreation and Wildfire Resilience, they really are identifying the specific workforce gaps that they know that they are going to be seeking to fill. And there really does seem to be this rational progression between kind of from that statewide action plan and then moving on to those work group strategies that are identifying what are the actions that are going to be needed within each of those sorts of areas of focus of treatments on the landscape. And then that kind of gives us the identification of the workforce types that we can anticipate. But this is a statewide snapshot, and we are in the Northern Region meeting, so I do want to break that down or bring it down to the kind of the Northern Region side. So in the profile that was released this morning, kind of some of those themes that rose to the top were ecological training, retention, local solutions, and market-driven solutions. And so then we kind of looked at identifying associated action items for those themes. It really, again, never ceases to amaze me that when you kind of look at these things broken out, you read these plans, you read these profiles, it really just aligns perfectly with what those of us that are doing the work know already, but we're in the weeds on it, and we get that. And so it makes sense there. But I think this is a great opportunity because we also understand you all are not in the weeds on it like we are. And I think that there are probably parameters that those of us that are in the weeds are like, well, if only they would, or if only someone could. You have parameters you're working within that we don't understand necessarily. So the discourse and the conversation is important. All right, so now I'm going to kind of move into shared challenges and barriers before we get to our panelists getting to introduce themselves and move into that. I mean, really, when you look at it, it's like, yeah, those seem pretty logical, intuitive. I think pretty much every single industry and every single sector are kind of struggling with these same things. But I think one of the differences, not that these are unique to our region, but I would propose that our region, because it's largely made up of isolated rural communities, we experience those same challenges and barriers in unique ways. Like, we experience that differently. It has different impact because of the environment that those challenges and barriers are existing in. I think Nick was talking about that a little bit in his panel. Funding, going after all those different opportunities. There's not capacity, especially in those small rural areas. You don't have grant contractor, that you can contract out to write your grants, manage your grants, do those things. And so it's really falling, this heavy administrative task is falling on a group whose expertise is doing the work out on the landscape. And so that often, I think, is a big barrier. So I've thrown out some food for thought on this. We're gonna kind of set the discussion up. These are the challenges, these are the barriers, and we're gonna be thinking about, I'm gonna ask the panelists to be thinking about this question, kind of as they are framing their answers. But is the current forest sector workforce an impediment to increasing the pace and scale of landscape restoration? And if you don't think it is, why not? And what is? And do we need to switch how we're thinking about it? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists. They're going to do 90-second insights, let you know who they are a little bit and why they're here. And then we will get into some questions. Todd.
All right. Thank you, Becky. I appreciate being here today, and thank you to the Executive Committee and the task force. So my name is Todd Jones. I'm the president of the Shasta Economic Development Corporation. It's really fitting that I'm following the county on the panel on Trinity County. I'm from Weaverville. I'm a rugged individualist, and I love Trinity County, and I love the North State. And my why is pretty straightforward. I run economic development. My goal is really to grow the economy of Shasta County, add more jobs. When I look back and talk to my elders about the last, 100 years and what was happening in the North State, the timber industry has been a major part of our economy for over 100 years. And back pre-1970s, we had healthy forest, healthy economies, healthy communities, healthy county budgets, and there was a lot to say for all that was happening in the forest industry. Now, I know we can't exactly go back to those days, but my real focus is how can we improve the economies and create opportunities, because I don't believe I'd create the jobs, but we can create opportunities for jobs to be created. And my big focus right now is how can we look at those new types of industries that are utilizing low value fuel to make things all the way from, biofuels, which are some major regulatory issues there, all the way down to mass timber, sustainable aviation fuel, and all these different types of industries that aren't quite there yet, but with the help of Justin and his team, they're starting to seed those opportunities. And I want to bring those jobs and those opportunities to Shasta County, because we do have a lot of infrastructure around us to make those jobs and manufacturing opportunities a reality here.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Daly. I'm the Executive Director of the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance, or TERRA for short. We're an intertribal nonprofit based in what is now known as Lake County, Pomo Country, also the homelands of the Wapo and Lake Miwok people. And our work really centers around building capacity for the tribal community to steward ancestral lands. And we do that through training programs, a lot of different kinds of training programs, and also through running an intertribal hand crew that is out on the ground doing ecocultural stewardship work. So we're training folks and employing folks and sharing that work with the community. I myself am not Native. I work for an all-Native board and learn from and work with, and I'm accountable to our board and Native staff. And I'm really here because I believe that the solutions to the challenges that we find ourselves in are held within Indigenous knowledge, and that Native people lived here for many millennia, and the land flourished under their stewardship and guidance, and that we need to, as a society, learn how to listen to that and let that guide our work and as we find our solutions moving forward. Thanks for having me here today.
Good afternoon. My name is Justin Britton. I am a forester with CAL FIRE's Wood Products team, where we manage a grant program that supports forest sector business development and forest sector workforce development. One of the things Becky asked me to talk about is what's meaningful to me in this work. And I had to think about that for a minute, but when it comes down to it, what's meaningful to me is getting to support programs such as Lindsay's and Becky's here at Shasta College that are making positive change in the lives of individuals while also ultimately impacting the future of California's forests in a good way. And there are several other projects represented here today that I couldn't mention them all, but maybe another dozen in the crowd. CAL FIRE started investing in workforce development partnerships several years ago as we quickly realized that workforce capacity was becoming a bottleneck to achieving the pace and scale of forest treatments that the department sought to achieve. So the initial project investments made by CAL FIRE's Forest Health team totaled about $18 million across 8 projects. And then enter our newest grant program, CAL FIRE's Business and Workforce Development Grants. We opened our first solicitation in January of last year. Since that time, we've funded about 18 workforce projects totaling $24 million in investment. Our most recent solicitation closed last Saturday, where we received an additional 10 workforce proposals requesting $20 million. And that's in addition to the 38 business development proposals that requested another $46 million. We have $15 million available that we will likely fund through this recent solicitation, and no future funding allocated to our program. So my take-home message today is that our program needs resources if we're going to continue supporting these projects that can address the bottlenecks to pace and scale.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Luster. I'm the Community Relations Manager for Sierra Pacific Industries. I work in a 12-county region from Lassen County to Mariposa County for Sierra Pacific. In those different counties, I serve on 8 different boards, from chambers to business associations, nonprofits representing Sierra Pacific, and also a civic advisory committee for a hospital. Within all those different roles that I play for Sierra Pacific, I find that pretty much everybody's experiencing the same thing out there with workforce. 3 years ago in my position with the company, and I've been doing this position for about 23 years now. 3 years ago, the conversation of workforce was not part of my role, but today it's becoming one of the most important things, one of the important situations that we face, because without a good, solid, diverse workforce, we can't do what we need to do in order to manage our force properly and also to run our company. So we're looking forward to this meeting today, and hopefully we can unpack some of the things that can truly make a difference as far as with the boots on the ground and fill some of those positions now that we so desperately need to fill, which can make a difference in forest health. Tim?
Good afternoon, Tim Aldinger. I'm with the Foundation for California Community Colleges. And wanted to start out with how often we have heard the word unprecedented today and in maybe the last 5-7 years. And if you saw the spike of that word, I bet it would be very high. I want to hone on 3 unprecedenteds: acres burned, public funding, and mental health. So I think in this room, all 3 of those are probably related. You all could tell me a lot more about acres burned, public funding, but I want to use those 3 to then think about how good, scaled up workforce development can be one of the ways, like the nationally recognized programs that happen here at Shasta College, can be one of the ways to really hit on all 3 of those unprecedenteds. And I want to give you an example. About a year ago, my team went up to South Lake Tahoe for a retreat. So we're going up 50, and it was the first time I'd gone up there since the Caldor fire. And I was a little bit shocked. I know a lot of you have a lot more experience in such situations, but for me, it was a real firsthand shock and felt a real sense of loss. Got up to the retreat, enjoyed the beauty of that wonderful place. And then on the last day, we sat with several Conservation Corps members who are also going to Lake Tahoe Community College. And in them, I saw young people from the Inland Empire, the LA Basin, people that looked like the demographics of California, who were passionate about working in the forest, who knew all about the species of trees, the flora, the fauna, and talked about wanting to become registered professional foresters or technicians, and it was such a polarity of kind of despair and hope. And so what I wanted to share and what I hope we can do today is to talk about how both at the foundation and on behalf of the California Community Colleges, we can be partners with all of you to help address those workforce pinch points that Mark described, and lots of you I'm sure feel, that will not just hit our acres burned or in our acres treated goals, meet this unprecedented public funding, but also address this huge issue of mental health where so many young people do not feel hope, but when they can find these pathways, suddenly feel agency, and all the reasons that all of you are here today, because you love the land, you love the forest, you love your community.
Thank you, panelists. So I want to jump into, I'm going to ask a question of the panel. I'm actually we're going to switch this up a little bit. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to ask you, we're going to jump into recruitment and retention, because we know that that is something, and Tim, this kind of piggybacks off of that, talking about the Conservation Corps members that you were with that really do represent maybe a different type of workforce than traditionally we see. So recruitment and retention, where do you see, and I'll just go down the line, Todd, if you have a thought, and just real quickly, and then I want to hand it over to the executive committee to be able to ask some questions. I'm sure they have some. What do you see from a recruitment and retention perspective, either changes that that you have seen that have shown, created some positivity, some positive impact to be applied to this sector? What are your ideas? What are your recommendations? What have you seen that works?
That's a big question. I'll try to answer it briefly. So I work with a lot of private employers, and I feel like right now I'm a little bit of a proxy for some timber operators. Peterson Timber is one of my board members, and I get a lot of insight from him on the challenges he sees on the ground and how we can grow this sector. Like I kind of alluded to in my intro, I think the private sector is fundamental to solving this. We cannot subsidize our way out of this. We are not going to be able to get enough public dollars to treat the acres. We have to create solutions, market driven. And at the end of the day, people need to be able to make money treating our forests. They have to make a profit, because that's what's going to be able to grow the workforce. Because right now, one of the challenges is, and again, I'm not intimately involved. I'm not a logger. Sometimes I wish I was, so I might go through the HELO program here pretty soon. But the consistency of the jobs, a lot of loggers cannot work year round. You're waiting on projects and having a pipeline. You don't have a pipeline necessarily for 3 or 4 years. You might have 3 or 4 months. It's grant based. You're relying on a fire safe council. You're relying on some grants to be able to get the product there. And again, getting to a product specifically for that low value fuels that actually can make money, because electricity is not the best use of wood. It's heavily subsidized, and it's really not the best way to utilize that low value wood. So I think, jumping back to your question again, seeing someone like Zane be able to grow his workforce, be a young person in the industry, he's under 30 and he has a great workforce with him, and be able to provide consistent work. He's partnering with the fire safety councils and all these different groups to create jobs as long as he possibly can in the year. And based on the economics, and that's a huge part of the sustainability of this, he's actually able to pay his employees a good wage. And so he's able to keep people and recruit people to stay with him, and kind of change the culture of the workforce. So I applaud his efforts, and I think we need to see more things that are market-based solutions to be able to really increase the pace and scale and encourage people to come into the workforce, because if you can make more money, that's a big driver for someone to get into this industry.
Yeah. Lindsay, I'm going to switch yours a little bit, because your lens, your objective, your outcomes are a little bit different. How do you talk to or recruit folks into your programs? What is it that you're connecting with them to drive that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think in our community, a lot of folks are still deeply connected to the land, and the unprecedented funding that is coming towards addressing the wildfire crisis is an opportunity for people to steward ancestral homelands. So recruitment is not a problem. It's word of mouth, and at this point, we have tribes coming from all over the state of California to train with us. People want access to training. They want access to tools and skill sets that will combine and mix with folks' rooted knowledge in the land and traditional ecological knowledge to bring solutions to the landscape. So our programs, are way over subscribed, and whenever we have a job posting, we have a long list of applicants. So, one of the things that is true is that the wildfire crisis is just really one piece of the crisis that our lands are facing. And it's great to see this panel, or that the Task Force Executive Committee is talking about water, is talking about biodiversity. These are all interconnected. And so our crews are, we're specialized generalists. In the cool season, we're out burning as much as we can, bringing beneficial fire back to the land, but we're also out doing fuels reduction projects with an ecocultural lens on the Mendocino National Forest. We're working with the local Lake County government to do cleanup of Clear Lake, one of the most toxic freshwater bodies in North America. So there's no shortage of work, and we can really train people to see the interconnectedness of this all, and to use skills that are alive and well in the tribal community, and put people to work addressing this big crisis that we're facing.
Thank you. I'm going to switch it up a little bit for Justin as well. What sort of recruitment and retention strategies are you seeing being proposed in some of the projects that you see? Like, what is kind of some new thought? Are you seeing some new innovative things?
Yeah, that's a good question that I was not prepared for.
I know.
I
I know.
I think when I look at across our workforce projects, it seems that the projects that are kind of meeting people where they're at, kind of what Lindsay was saying and what Shasta College does with Hilo, you're giving folks opportunities. It's rewarding work, like Tim was getting at. I'm proud to say of the projects that we've worked with, whatever it is, 20, 30 workforce projects, they've all been a success to date. And so I think what's going on out there is working well.
Thank you, and I'm sorry, I promise I won't spring another one on you maybe. Mark, you talked a little bit, just about the difficulties that you've seen. How is Sierra Pacific? How have they changed? Have they changed their kind of recruitment retention strategies over the last 2, 3, 4 years?
Yeah, so we certainly recognize that without change, you become the dinosaur. And as an industry, you really certainly have to change. The slide you brought up earlier, where you talked about the threat to the future workforce if we don't change. Well, I think the threat is actually today. Because if you look at the amount of openings we have today in the positions, we could be facing curtailments versus actually expanding our business and being able to do more. Currently, we could hire on the spot right now about 225 people. Of those 225 people, about 40% of that would be skilled laborers, folks who could drive a piece of equipment, somebody who could run a machine, somebody that's on a forklift, maybe somebody who's an electrician, maybe somebody who's a welder. So those type of positions are really important for us to get trained up. And then in addition to that, the retention piece of that is really, really huge, because if we don't learn how to retain our folks, it becomes that leaky bucket theory, right? If you put water in a bucket that has holes in it, you're going to continue to lose that water. So we have to be able to retain our employees and look at today's workforce and determine what does today's workforce need versus the workforce of 30 years ago. 30 years ago, guys would come to the job and gals would come to the job and they work for 30, 40 years and they retire. Today, we see a lot more job hopping. So what makes that job attractive so people actually stay in those positions and really want to work for you? So I think it's that social piece. They have to work for a company that has this social concern and being part of the environment. I think that's important. One of the questions you ask people nowadays about wages, that's not as important to some folks as it used to be. Folks want to have that work-life balance. Our positions in our company, whether you're a logger or you're a forester, work-life balance, you can't work from home, so you have to be able to come to work. So how do we create that balance? So at Sierra Pacific, we're very aware of these trends, these changes that we're seeing in today's workforce, and we're learning how to adapt to that. Even the simple ways of how do we market to the new type folks who are looking for jobs. The marketing process has to be different. So if you just put on your billboard, hey, $40 an hour, that may not get you what you want. So really have to look at how do we get into folks' heads, how do we get into their emotions and determine what folks need today, and then how do we deliver on that? You can't just market that if you're not going to deliver upon it. Because if you don't deliver what you're marketing, obviously you're not going to have that retention piece. So from Sierra Pacific's perspective, we're pulling all the stops out. We're looking at new ways to do things because we want to be a leader in this. We don't want to be a follower in this, because if you're following this whole new trend, you're going to continue to see losses in the workforce, and that deficit will continue to grow. So we're trying to close some of those gaps, and that's working with the schools, working with the colleges, working places that we can actually develop a workforce for the future. So thank you.
Thank you. And Tim, I'm just going to let you answer it, and then we're going to kick it over to the executive committee. But I know you have a lot of experience across a lot of different industries. So actually, I'm gonna tweak it for you too. Have you seen anything in your experience in other industries, other sectors that's worked really well that you could see being applied to this sector that maybe hasn't been tried? Something crazy idea.
Crazy idea. Just earlier this week, we had another retreat. So you're going to think of me as, hey, the guy that has retreats. We were in Sacramento and we went to Sac City College, and we heard about their pressure of their business partners finding people to go into HVAC programs. And so what they talked about, and I do think you do some of this in your programs, Becky, but they talked about the importance of the need for colleges to be as flexible as possible to meet the needs of those students that are coming. And those students are almost all working. They need to have nighttime classes. They need to have flexibility in scheduling. And if possible, they would like it to be as compact and focused on opportunities to engage with work and have upward mobility, and not necessarily go and get a full degree. And there's a whole bunch behind that statement. I think we could debate that for a long time, but I'll say that and couch that with a study I just came across on LinkedIn. It's actually a couple of years old, but a group polled 2,000 adults and said, would you rather get your child an internship at Google or a Harvard education? And 2 to 1, it was Google. Someone said Harvard. They went to Harvard. Google. So I say that because there is a desire to feel that the investment you make in your training is going to lead to an opportunity to do good work. I do think wages are a lot about it, but I also think, especially with younger people, meaning, impact is a huge thing. That's again why this work that everyone here is engaged in is so important, because that meaning, you don't have to do steps to the meaning. The meaning is right there every day when you're doing the work. And so getting that exposure, having flexible programs, connectivity with business partners or agency partners, employer partners are all really important hallmarks to good programs.
Thank you. And with that, Wade,
Yeah.
Jennifer, anyone?
It's an excellent panel. Huge thanks to you all. And I confess this is an area that I'm still learning so much in, but I'll share some thoughts and then maybe end with a tough question for our community college friends at the end of the panel there. First of all, Todd, I think we totally agree that there need to be more market opportunities to manage the forests in an ecologically balanced way. I don't think it's the case as it was in the 1970s or even 80s, where there's this outdated paradigm of the environment versus timber. We know that today there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of acres where there are slash piles 2 stories high that are leaching methane in the forest and that are waiting to burn in the next wildfire, or we're burning them ourselves and creating smoke. So we're taking, what we want to take, what is right now a dangerous waste product, and turn it into economic development and jobs. So the good news is, I think we're all working to point in that direction. It's not a silver bullet. I will draw some dots or connect some dots. We have on the task force a work group led by a woman, or spearheaded by a woman named Elizabeth Bentoncourt here today, really identifying how do we in government provide those market opportunities? Because you're right, we don't provide the jobs, we provide the business opportunities, and then those employers hire people. So I really want to challenge you and others up here to really help us understand with your industry partners what you need from state, whether it's, streamlined permitting, whether it's some subsidy for capital investment, whether it's low interest loans to help get those businesses running. Again, I think we can do this in a way that does right by the landscapes in the forest, but hires people. And then Lindsay, I think it's inspiring what you all are doing. And I think we completely agree that we need to continue to provide resources to tribal governments to build this workforce. I'm so proud that we're standing up or helping stand up tribal conservation corps, and that we've got this $100 million of nature-based solutions specifically for tribes. And so how do we scale this up and really think about what's the durable funding for your program, so that this isn't just the priority for this administration, federal or state, but it continues on. And then for Justin, I'm such a big fan of this CAL FIRE program. I had the benefit of helping groundbreak or cut the ribbon on a community sawmill outside of Greenville that was put together to salvage logs from the Dixie Fire. And again, the best ideas are in the communities and with the business people there. And so you guys are investing in that, and sign me up for advocating for more funding for the program, because it's clearly working. And then Mark, Sierra Pacific is an anchor employer across the state and here. And I think we need to help you build and keep your workforce, because it concerns me that you're such a durable employer, yet you're facing real workforce needs. And so I guess the challenge for Mark and Becky here, I'm not Mark and Becky, Tim and Becky, is we spend a lot of money on workforce development in the state. Hundreds of millions of dollars. And so from my perspective, we have to turn that into jobs for people into the industries or in the sectors. So what information do you feel like you need, or what do you think you need as community colleges to really build programs that are attractive to people that want to be trained, and then connect folks to true, good, durable jobs?
Do you want to go first? You want me to go first? Okay. I'm actually, this is an honest forum, right? And I don't know that I want my administrators here, but what I would, Tim and I actually were just talking about this. So we have the honor of being part of a statewide collaborative that includes other community college programs led by the Foundation for California Community Colleges through the EDA, so federal dollars, Good Job Challenge funding to be able to focus on this question as well. So really trying to do these things, braiding the funding, leveraging the efforts that we're making. In California, and so maybe this is a hint for Justin, and I don't know all the parameters or the reasons why, but I know that my state grant funding that I have is looking at completers of programs. That does not equal job placement. That equals a certificate that may or may not ever result in someone actually doing the work on the landscape, whereas the federal requirements, they're looking at those job placements. How many jobs are you placing? How many people are you placing into jobs? So I think that thinking about how can we work on that, because that's really ultimately the end result. And there's a lot of nuances in there, but the end result, the end objective is growing workforce, which means those people have jobs in the sector. And so how do we tie outcomes, expected outcomes, metrics, all of that to the work that's being done and invested? Because the strategy in trying to do the work and where you're starting from based on where your endpoint is, it's going to be different. And I think that that's something that would be helpful to have in alignment, because we're also reporting state, not different from federal. And I think those alignments help. And I think that's a more accurate reflection of honestly the good that it's doing.
I noticed you were really in agreement with everyone, and then you threw us hard questions. Jeez. An additional element that Becky kind of touched on, but I'd put more emphasis on, is something actually that you do, and that is apprenticeship. And so if we break that down, it's partly, can we find ways that the risk that Becky put on that slide of, if you complete your training, that's potential, but if you get the job, then that's, actual development. Apprenticeship actually breaks that dichotomy down. You are working while you're learning. So there's a number of benefits to that. One is a lot of people who don't have the luxury of taking time off to go to school, they need to support their family, ideally can have a good, or at least a starter wage that can at least cover their costs while they're going to school, and that's blended. Now, there's all kinds of intricacies with apprenticeship. It's not a silver bullet, but that model of better blending working and learning, and thinking about all these, like the last panel talking about doing things to scale. I mean, can we get lots more students in that mix, watching the professionals do it and learning? And the core model is great. And we also have the climate core that the governor has helped move forward. So I think that's one piece of the puzzle, is reducing the gap between training and work and kind of trying to blend those together.
I'll totally agree. And I only asked you a tough question because I had to ask a question in there. So, but the core, I mean, we have several thousand people that come out of the California Conservation Corps, the local Conservation Corps, the Climate Corps, the Jobs Corps, the College Corps, several thousand people. And I'll tell you, in the state, we did a really horrible job of recruiting and hiring those folks historically. So we're trying to change that. So part of this too is really figuring out how we already have this farm system of young people that have self-selected into this, and we have to help them. They're already being trained and they're getting sort of that apprenticeship training. Then how do we recruit them and get them into jobs, right?
Yeah. Yes, definitely agree.
So I'll just echo that, and I know open it up too, but it's so interesting and fascinating. And I'm with you, Wade. I am a novice on many of this in terms of workforce and development, recruitment, and hiring. We're always trying new things. And the dichotomy between, we also have so many interns, so many people that come in and they're self-selected folks. And then you hear all the time, nobody wants to work in the woods. And I'm like, well, we have all of these people who are coming in, and yet there's this constant thing of nobody wants to do that work anymore. So I'm trying to match up, how do you change that even? Because when you get the flywheel of, oh, you don't want to do that, this isn't, fulfilling work or whatever the statement is on it. And then you have all of these students or younger people and at all ages that are coming into the workforce. I don't understand how we have such a dichotomy on it, and I need to learn a little bit more about that. But I really appreciate you guys sharing that, because even Mark, 225 positions that you've got open. So that's what I heard. I'm like, well, why wouldn't you? I mean, everybody apply for SPI, man. I mean, apply for us. I'd share that out with everybody. There's a job there if you want. We have the same challenges, though, as well as it's maybe not the recruitment, but the retention part. Certainly I've seen when we do bring our entry into the Forest Service, and I'm not going to speak for the other federal agencies, but very quickly, I want to move on from this. It's a great entry point. And then I want to move out of that and move on to another one. So that career pathway and some of those positions that Becky, you showed up from the subcommittee, so many of those are related that's that career pathway. You can continue to do different types of things, but it is all in the environmental sector in that way too. So I'm kind of rambling now, but it was when I was trying to connect the dots, and there's so much dissonance on what people want, and yet the reality of a base of people that we actually have in the system, and just how do we place them.
Yeah.
So
I'd like
it's
to add-
not a question, but if any of us comments, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that.
Yeah.
So I think part of this is rebranding, right? You look at the mill type jobs, we have to make these jobs sexy again. If you've got 7,000 people that come out of a program, where are they at today? Where are they going and why are they choosing not to stay in the industry? So we know marketing is very, very powerful. So if we can take a different approach and look at how we market to the young people, get the apprenticeship jobs, get folks to come and see what we do. And again, as companies and individual companies, we still have to deliver though, right? If we bring folks in, we got to deliver to keep them there. So that's our job to retain, and we can certainly use some help doing that as well, because that's marketing too, internal marketing. But certainly how folks perceive those jobs, we can create that atmosphere to get people to come to work for us. But that's kind of a new paradigm. That's something that we've never had to do before. Used to do applications, you get 100 people that show up for a position. Today you might get 3 and you might want to hire 0. I mean, so I think that's the way we have to kind of think going forward.
That's right. We seem to be on 2 tracks here as government. One track, and both of these are exemplified by CAL FIRE grants. On the one hand, we're investing in wood utilization based on what we're hearing from Todd and Wade, that the framing is sustained funding leads to new markets, leads to jobs. So that's one track that addresses a lot of this. A whole separate effort, as Wade said, is funding community college programs there, CCC there, whatever. Is that second category simply a failure of the first? In other words, if we do the first, does the other stuff take care of itself? Do we need to invest in, and if money is limited, if CAL FIRE doesn't have enough money to do both, is it better to be investing in the new facilities which will generate jobs, or invest that same money into job training programs?
That's a very, I mean, that's part of the complexity of the entire workforce development conversation, honestly, is it's a chicken and the egg kind of question. Just a sec, Todd. I'm gonna give it over to you to answer. But I think one of the key points that we're talking about, whether it's on the business development side, you have a different, folks are looking at that from an investment perspective, and is the opportunity there? And we heard earlier about stewardship agreements and feedstock security and all of those things. And that's really gonna drive decisions on the private investment side. And so but when we're talking about workforce development, to Mark's point, I think we all know it's messaging. And I think actually Lindsay exemplified it really, really well with the work that she's doing in that stewardship training, because there's a connection there, and that connection is what's driving it. And so for me, and my background is not in forestry, I can't drive any of those things. My background's in marketing and branding and messaging, and you have to find that resonance, that connection, because it's there. And there's a larger talent pool within the state of California that have no idea any of these jobs exist. We don't do a good job as a sector of drawing the connection between the societal value. So I had a really crazy idea last week, threw it out. When you get your paycheck, right, and you have what you expect to see, your wages, your benefits, your all those things, why don't we have something on there about the good climate positive work you did this week for whatever your job is within the sector? Or why don't we have something in there about how much carbon was stored because of the work you did? Why aren't we tying those societal values for this generation that cares deeply, it defines them? Why aren't we tying the work that we all know matters to those very things, but making it very out front and communicating it and articulating it very well to a workforce that we're trying to recruit, and have them think about this work in a different way? Todd.
I'll just go really quickly. I think that was a great answer, Becky. And just to answer your question again, I think you understand where I'm coming from for the most part. We need to see these market things come to play. And I think that if you can create those markets, then and they can be economical enough for people to have good jobs, then you can kind of create and the workforce is going to change, but you can kind of create opportunities. Because if we have a bunch of workforce programs, but we don't have enough end use for low value fuel specifically, and again, there's lots of other things that need to be focused on, the sawmills and whatnot, but then you don't really even need those people. Obviously, we do need workers, but we need to create more opportunities for them. And I had another thought, but and the other part of it is on the workforce side. I work with a lot of manufacturers in Shasta County and a lot of different businesses. Workforce is the #1 challenge in economic development anywhere in the country for every industry. I love the programs that Shasta College has, especially the heavy equipment logging operating program. But Mark, this is a question to you. Out of those 225 jobs, how many of those people actually need to have specialized training? Because what I hear is that a lot of employers just need someone that can show up to work because they're going to train them how to do their job.
Yeah, I agree. So out of those jobs there, I was talking to a logger last week, working with a different organization, Mother Job Training in Tuolumne County, and they were looking at working on a program to kind of help get some folks in that regard. So the logging company, I said, well, how many folks do you need? So for the logging company, there's 6 different loggers in Tuolumne County. They need a total right now today of 12 people. They need 12 people who can operate equipment. They need about 6 people who can be ground crews on the ground, so 6 people as laborers. Then in addition to that, going forward, they need about 2 operators per year based on attrition. And so that's kind of what that need is there. So you've got to have those loggers in place. You've got to have the folks to do the thinning in the forest. Then you have to have the people in place who can actually work inside the sawmills, the manufacturing piece of that. So out of that, you need electricians, you need the maintenance folks we call them millwrights in the industry. And then once you get through that process, folks who come in as laborers, that's going to be about 60% of that number. But there's upward mobility for the folks who are laborers. So once you get the lumber process there, you have to have the log trucks to get the lumber to the mill. You also have to have the lumber trucks to get the lumber out of the mill, so that's that whole spectrum. So with any part of that equation that fails, the whole thing fails. So as we create new opportunities and as we create new industries, so to speak, if we can't fill the existing pieces today, my question is then how are we going to fill some of those new positions that we're creating for the future?
So to me, Patrick, what I'm hearing is it's not a case of if you build the jobs, they will come. Yes, we need to build more jobs to get the work done, and we need to ensure that there's trained folks, and we need to figure out how to brand this in such a way that people want to be part of this sector. So, I mean, I think you asked a good question, but to me, it's like, it's not an either or, it's a both and. Doug.
I've been dying to jump in here. You know, I have my opinions and I could go on for hours and you probably don't want to hear that, but ask me later. But wearing my RCRC hat, I get the joy of going back to DC and, you know, begging for money or begging for something. And we were just there, RCRC, and the ask was, hey, let the Forest Service build workforce housing on Forest Service land. And so I was a landlord. I'm still a landlord, but I was a bigger landlord before the Camp Fire. And 3-bedroom, 2-bath, older home, you know, around $1,200 a month. And now it's probably 1,000 more in Paradise. And what's really changed? You know, there was a fire, so now there's a cost to rebuild. I'm not going to rebuild a lot of them because the return on investment just isn't there. So, you know, my point is we need workforce housing for these folks. And I think if you know, I hate the word subsidize, but if we could have lower rents or lower cost of entry homes for people in these industries, they're going to come, because otherwise you got to live in an area with really old homes, and a lot of folks are like, I don't want to live in a 1970s double wide. You know, Paradise was full of those because it was all built as a retirement community back in the day. And so that's my ask to, you know, the Forest Service. I always like to point to Jennifer, but this is above her pay grade. And let's get some workforce housing. Actually, it's our elected leaders back there. And let's make it desirable, because would I want to go work in the woods, out in the rain, the cold, the heat for $20 an hour at a starter job? Or would I go flip burgers in town? I mean, that's the challenge is we're creating this disparity of a tough job, but with no rewards versus, you know, I mean, I'm picking on burger flippers. That's a tough job too. But, and I think the other thing is, why do I want to become a diesel mechanic in California? Our folks, our intelligent folks at the state says, hey, we're going batteries. But we also have no place for those batteries to go after they expire, because we haven't gotten that far. And so I think that's a challenge as well, is why do I want to invest in a career that's a dinosaur or based on a dinosaur? And so you're probably getting a taste of my politics, but I digress. So anyway, more of a comment than questions, but I think
because I love it. I mean, Doug's like the best. He's like the best panelist we have because you keep it really provocative. I mean, I would say, not to get in this whole question around the future of transportation, but more about the industry. This is not a dying industry. I mean, I think the point is that there's a stereotype that, logging was in the past. Logging is, a dangerous occupation that doesn't pay enough, and that, California is trying to chase it out. I think what we need to do is explain that actually this is about landscape management. This is about landscape stewardship. And so the question is, do you want to be involved in, stewarding these lands? And that could mean that you're planning, projects and you're a planner. It could mean that you're working in a mill. It could mean you're a small business owner and an innovator doing mass timber. So to me, actually, I mean, I hear you. I think that's that the perception is that among some that these are dead end jobs. But I think the point is that we can't allow that to be the frame, because the fact is we need this sector moving forward. This is a growth sector.
I didn't mean like logging's a dead end job. It's like the mechanic that supports logging.
No, and I don't mean to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, I just didn't want you to think I'm anti-logging, because I'm not. I have 3 chainsaws myself.
I think those are really good. I think those are really good points and really good questions. And I think actually, if we could bring the PowerPoint back up, we have about 8 minutes, I'm told. And I want
to make sure Don can get in his question too.
Oh, Don, I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
No worries. I just wanted to maybe pose something for Lindsay, and that is, there's been a major influx of funding to support a lot of the tribal work around stewardship. And thinking of the work that the Indigenous Stewardship Network has been doing as we've formed as an organization, we learned that many traditional cultural practitioners have really worked more in a voluntary role. So there's a really important value that Tara and other groups are bringing to this space. One thing that hasn't maybe come up that I think is important to also recognize is that for the other piece for Indigenous stewardship is that access to place is a very important part of it. And so my question is, can you speak to the ecocultural stewardship benefits of the Terra crew to be able to connect with ancestral lands and partnerships and networks?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So we've had so far a really rewarding journey in partnering with our federal and state agencies. We have a master stewardship agreement with the Mendocino, and we're set up to do fuels work out there, but with an ecocultural lens. And so we'll get a prescription from the fuel shop that says, this is what we want to see in terms of our horizontal and vertical spacing. And then we go out there and we look around, and we're working in the ancestral territories of our crew members that get to say, oh yeah, there's 19 other ecologically and culturally valuable species that you did not identify that we would like to steward and work into this plan here. So that's been a really wonderful partnership, and we're excited to expand that. I think it's also happening with private landowners, because bringing beneficial fire back to tribal trust land is still very difficult on a federal level. We've made a lot of progress on a state level, but federally it's still very limiting. We've been working with private landowners and kind of evolving ways of working with private landowners to allow access. So we'll come in and assess the land and kind of figure out how to set up a burn, and then have an agreement with the landowner to be able to come back and gather. And for a lot of our tribal partners, it's the first time they've been on that land in over 100 years. So they're really powerful partnerships and collaborations emerging that we did not anticipate. So that's been very exciting. And the conversation is so rich, and I think one of the things that I wanted to comment on the earlier thread was, when we talk about market-based solutions, market for what? What are we valuing? And if we're talking about really looking at landscape health, how are we defining that? How are we valuing that? Because I think that, you know, one of the most exciting things is all of the support and funding for this work, but frankly, it's one of the most terrifying things about it. I think a lot of times we're focused on pace and scale, and yes, that's important, but it's what kind of work are we actually doing on the ground? Because the work can be really harmful and extractive, or it can be regenerative, and it can be empowering of our communities. And we have to be, I think, careful of making sure that, you know, we've got all these great minds in the room. How are we defining the value of what's left after we go out and process that woody biomass? How are we setting that up for really a paradigm shift? You know, it's not a rebranding, it's a paradigm shift. There has to be like, those deep societal values of relationship to place, and to learn from, you know, our native leaders that the land doesn't belong to us. We belong to the land. If we're stewarding in a good way, we're responsible for that caretaking. So how do we figure out, you know, I'm not a policy person, I'm not an economics person, but there is a way to build a society where we're valuing water quality, biodiversity, relationship to land. So I think that's a question that I would be really curious to hear from this group, like how are we doing that?
I think that's so. I think that's so well put, and I mean, to me, that's a really great way to bring this conversation full circle, because if you think about the word extractive and you think about the word regenerative, they're kind of opposites. So the extractive, in my mind, is to take something away, and the regenerative is to bring it back. And I think when we, you know, I lead the Natural Resources Agency, which really was built around, you know, extracting value from the environment. And I think our focus now is regenerating the environment. I think that herein lies the opportunity, though, that we know that we need to regenerate landscapes. And I think we need a strong standard and strong protections to ensure that anything we're doing on the landscape, whether it's subsidized by government or done by a private sector, is truly beneficial to the landscape. But I think we actually can regenerate the landscape and provide, you know, market incentives to do so.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think, you know, we have to be careful, and I think we have to be driven by ultimately what's beneficial for wildfire resilience and landscape health. But if we can set those parameters, then I think there's a tremendous opportunity for folks to come in, help us do that, and actually provide jobs and economic development.
Yeah, I think that's the real opportunity here, and it's an exciting time, but we have an opportunity to do it well and to really lead in the West, or not, you know. And so I think that's a really important conversation that we can be having. And how do we set up, you know, thinking about what are the market-based solutions? Well, how do we use the woody biomass, you know, sort of paradigm to also then be moving towards setting up landscapes to bring beneficial fire back, because that is ultimately that bringing fire back on a large scale way to maintain the landscapes is the most cost effective and most ecologically and culturally beneficial way to maintain the work. So that's where we get to work together and think about, okay, what's the evolution of those jobs over time, the short term, and then evolving into really being able to bring fire back to the land.
And I think that's right. And I'd make one more comment. Becky brought up the question around durability of jobs. So if we're training people for jobs, we can't train folks through the community college for a job that lasts 2 or 3 years. Or if we do, they need to be eyes wide open on that. And to your point, Lindsay, a lot of what we want to do on landscapes is we do have to move in there with vegetation clearance or vegetation thinning, some of it mechanical, and then we want to put prescribed fire on the landscape. So it's not that there'll be every 3 years that vegetation removal. So then the question is, what does the overall sort of, you know, aggregate workflow look like, so that if we're hiring those folks to do vegetation management and run masticators, et cetera, how much work is there going to be, you know, given this kind of evolution of our landscape management?
Yes, thank you. I was going to thank Lindsay as well for kind of bringing that full circle, because I think that is a larger part of the conversation. And I think that kind of to Doug's point, and the dying diesel mechanic, but we don't want to set ourselves up for that. There's a lot there's a lot of urgency on building workforce to do the work that has been identified to be done right now. But I do think that there's strategy involved to make sure that that training lasts for that individual into the future. And I think that that's where the opportunities to engage all the different perspectives that we have on this panel, that we tried to be really intentional about bringing, because there are different lenses, that it's a combination of all those things is where ultimately the solution will be found. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please join us in thanking the panel. Oh. Tim, you're going to get the last word.
Sorry, one thing. If this little teaser on workforce in this space has just got your heart stirring, 1 month from now, November 6th through 8th, in Anderson, just south of here, my colleague Jeff and I welcome you to come to a Forestry Workforce Summit. It'll be our second one. We did one earlier in the year in Davis. We'd love to have as many of you here as possible, and we will be digging into all these topics and going layers deeper. So thanks.
Thank you. And we'll make sure that that is publicized in the newsletter and on the website of the task force. So thanks very much, panel.